Okay, for lesson 3, I want to make a big change of pace here just for the fun of it, and let's get into some open tuning stuff. Now, open tunings have just become more and more popular over the last few years, in the last 2 decades, I'd say. A lot of tunings are driven by, I'd say, modern rock guys, really, playing all kinds of things, and they just want to sound different than everybody that came before them, and so they're just exploring the instrument. A lot of times they're just taking all the strings and tuning down completely for one reason, to give it a bigger, thicker, heavier sound, but also just to sound different, you know, just to put yourself automatically in a different key than normally, than a standard E tuning. Another thing is that in many cases it's so that they can accommodate their vocalist, especially if you're listening to metal and they're doing a lot of that real throaty kind of stuff. They need the lower tone, so they might take the entire guitar and change from what we call E standard tuning to a completely lower tuning that's still standard. In other words, all the notes are still in the same basic configuration, except that instead of it being E, they might put it to D or C sharp or even C, and some guys even as low as B. Now by the time you get into that realm, your strings are getting real floppy, so what they do is they use thicker strings. So they might end up having like a 56 on their low E string to accommodate the slack in the string. It's a cool thing. It's a lot of fun. Another thing people do with open tuning is to not tune the entire guitar down equally. They just change certain things, and you come up with all manner of different tunings. And a lot of the open tunings have been around, especially if you're thinking about maybe more folk music. A lot of open tunings have been around for decades and generations and centuries, I'm sure. DADGAD comes to mind. D-A-D-G-A-D is a popular one from years ago. One of the most common and easiest open tunings is the drop D tuning. And all you really do is you just take your low bass note and tune it down a whole step to D. Okay? So now it's lining up with your D note. Okay? Now, people have been doing this for generations. Country players have been using the drop D tuning for a long time. And part of it's probably because they like to play caged chords, and they like to play that D chord, and they want a low bass note that complements that chord. So with drop D, you've got it. You can play your D chord, but you can go ahead and strum all the way through, and you can do all kinds of cool stuff. So there's an example of how you might fool around with a D chord, caged D chord, in an open tuning, in a drop D tuning. Is you're taking that chord, maybe lift that finger off, and be using that finger to be playing some of these notes. And hey, the most common notes to play are the ones the finger can naturally reach. You don't have to do any weird stretches, because that's not what people do. People always take the easy way out with guitar, okay? So when you lift that finger off that note over there and use it over here, you're going to reach the 3rd fret on the 6th string, 3rd fret on the 5th string, and 3rd fret on the 4th string, and those are the common notes that a country song or anybody doing just a D chord like this might be doing with a drop D. It's a very cool sound, okay? Okay, if we look at a drop D use in a more of a hard rock kind of an attitude, this is what we end up doing. We've got that D. We're not going to be playing that D chord. Basically, you don't even need your hand on the neck at all. Right here, just by strumming the 5th and 6th string, you essentially have the first 2 notes of a bar chord or a power chord. You are playing a power chord here. You're playing a D note and an A note, which is the same as if we played a D power chord or the first few notes of a D bar chord. Except that you have them with an open string and a nice thick low sound. And a really cool thing that you can do with this is now, because that chord is 2 notes that are adjacent or across from each other like that, you can just bar those 2 strings and play basically power chords up and down the neck. And it has that deep growling sound, which is so cool. But what this really makes possible is that you can play chords, power chords, as riffs. you can play really quick stuff you could never do with a chord. So something like this. Have all kinds of fun making up cool riffs with the drop D tuning like that and just sliding your finger around. Sometimes when I do that I use just the first finger and I just slide it up and down. Sometimes I put other fingers into the riff, you know, whatever the mood strikes me to do. But have some fun with that. Fool around with that a bunch. Okay? One final element that I want to talk to you about drop D tuning, and especially again if you're working on this kind of stuff. Again, a lot of hard rock and metal guys in the current age are using a drop D tuning and fooling around with that. And so, if you're doing that, well, if you're doing drop D, well, what key are you in? You're in the key of D, okay? And so, if the song is a drop D tuning song, and maybe it's got some of that heavy riff stuff going on, but then all of a sudden they go to the guitar solo, or maybe it's just a sort of a guitar melody that's playing, well, where is it going to be on the fretboard? Well, it's going to be in your D scales, and probably your D minor scales. And so there's two very common places that you'll find the riffs or the solos in a drop D song. The first place is at the 5th fret, okay? And really what we've got here is, if we go back to our pentatonic scale lessons, this is pattern number 4, okay? If I was playing in the key of D minor, my 4th pattern would start out on the 5th fret here. Now I'm in a drop D tuning, so the notes won't sound right. The real notes will sound like that, but the fingering would be here. So we'll avoid that string when we go to play the riff in the drop D song. We'll just go ahead and start here on the D root note, and we'll go like this. Okay, and so now what you have is the remainder of the 4th pentatonic pattern. And so if you have a drop D song, and then all of a sudden it goes into a lead guitar part, chances are it's there. Okay? One other place that you might find it, of course, would be in the main pentatonic pattern. And in the key of D, that means we're way up at the 10th fret. Okay? And so you might have that drop D thing going on. Okay? So it makes sense, doesn't it? You're playing in drop D, you're playing in the key of D. The only reason you'd go into drop D is to play in the key of D. Okay? And so there's the two places where you'll very commonly find lead guitar parts or riffs if you're playing a drop D song. Alright? Have fun with that stuff.